Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next webinar in the series of the Data Science Institute. And today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, which is understanding workplace data, which is part of our data literacy series. My name is Jan-Willem, and I will be your host today for this upcoming session. And in the next 35 minutes, we're going to take a bit more of a deep dive into the key concepts behind data literacy. And I will tell you a little bit around proper data visualization techniques and how you can use data storytelling to convey your message within an organization. But before we get started, just a few things about the logistics of today's session. Please note that today's session is being fully recorded. So if you're choosing to speak out or be or asked to be unmute, your voice as well as your image might be recorded for data privacy reasons. I strongly encourage you to ask questions during this session. That's the benefit of doing a webinar live, is that you can ask questions about the materials directly. In this Microsoft Teams environment, there is a Q&A button at the top, which is specifically there for webinars, where you have the opportunity to ask questions, which I will moderate towards the end of the session. And last but not least, take note that you will receive a full PowerPoint presentation of all the slides that I'm presenting today. So there's no need to make screenshots with your phone or on your computer. Our organization will email all of the slides to you after the session has ended within 24 hours. So that's a little bit of the logistics. Let's get started. And I would like to start with giving a brief introduction about myself. My name is Jan-Willem, and I'm the director at Cybient, as well as the president of the Data Science Institute. And over the course of my career, I've written and published quite a number of books that are very heavily involved within the data domain. Some of the materials that you're going to be seeing today are coming from the data literacy publication, which came out around 2 years ago, and which provide a guide on how to work with data in an efficient and effective manner within an organizational context. So let's dive right into it. For today's session, I've prepared a number of key topics that I thought would be interesting to really dive deeper into understanding workplace data. And I'm going to start with giving an overview of the concept of data literacy. We will talk about why this is important, what some of its key components are, and why, in my personal opinion, everyone in every organization should have a basic data literacy, at least at a fundamentals level. After that, I will cover some more advanced data concepts and showcase why this is important for the next step, which is data visualization. The art of creating and communicating with data effectively has a lot to do with understanding how you build proper data visualizations or how you can get your message across in the most effective manner. So we'll dive into some of the good and best practices around the creation of data visualizations, and I will showcase you some of the common techniques, but also some of the common mistakes. And last but not least, I will show you why this data visualization is so incredibly important by moving to our final topic, which is around data storytelling. We make data visualizations for a reason. In most organizations, you use data to either convince something, to justify a budget, to start a project, or to facilitate any kind of change. In order to do that in a convincing manner, you don't just need to understand data, you need to be able to tell your message and your story with that data set. So we'll end this session with looking at some of the common techniques in data storytelling. And I'm hoping that after the webinar today, you feel a bit more knowledgeable in terms of the content and how you can use data effectively. Now, last thing before we get started, please note that today's session is hosted by the Data Science Institute, better known as DASCIN. This organization is an independent body of knowledge for the development and advancement of data best practices. Through education, certification, and knowledge sharing, just like we're doing today, DASCIN enables governments, organizations, and individuals to use data on a day-to-day basis to make smarter and more sustainable decisions. If you're interested in joining DASCIN as a member or interested in any of the topics that the organization provides, I strongly encourage you to check out their website at www.dascin.org. So now that we've covered some of the main logistics, let's dive into our first main topic right away. And that is to get a bit of a better understanding of what do we mean with data literacy. And maybe more importantly, why is data literacy so important in any organization today? Let me start with a very simple definition. Data literacy is the ability to understand, work with, analyze, and communicate with data in order to make informed decisions. And there's a few key things that I'd like you to take away from this decision. First of all, it's very heavily about understanding what you're actually looking into. Data is typically depicted in rows, columns, graphs, in visualizations. So having a critical understanding of what the data that you're looking at actually means will bring you a long way in informed decision making. We're all used to looking at simple data sets, like looking at averages or looking at minimum and maximum values. We might be able to differentiate between positive and negative numbers. But data literacy goes further than that. It is about understanding the underlying formats of the data, the way in which that data is stored, and the way in which it can potentially be changed and altered, but also about the value or the inherent value that is part of that data set itself. In order to understand and work with that data, there is a very critical step that we call the interpretation. And the ability to not just look at data, but to interpret it, ask meaningful questions, and sometimes ask critical questions about it, is the skill that will bring you most from a data literacy perspective. Now, data literacy is an art as well as a science that has been around for approximately the last decade. And especially with AI tools that have been proliferating in the last 5 to 10 years, the ability to be data literate, to understand what it is that we're actually looking at, and to make informed decisions upon, which is the interpretation stage, is now becoming more critical than ever. So in order to start building on data literacy, and in order to start ensuring that you have the ability to ask these more critical questions, data literacy is typically separated into 4 different levels of what we call data literacy maturity or data literacy levels. Most people in the world are what we refer to as data aware. They understand that data exists and that it matters. They're able to spot basic patterns in tables, and they might work with Excel sheets, data visualizations on a day-to-day basis. Everyone who has gone through primary and middle school will be taught basic data literacy skills with which most people in the world are data aware. Now, what data literacy is trying to accomplish is to help people through those different data literacy levels beyond level 1. And at level 2, we say that individuals need to be data informed, being able to use reports, dashboards, verify and validate the information, but more importantly, to use this information to ask the right kind of questions and have an in-depth understanding of what the information that is portrayed in charts and visualizations actually means. We call this data informed because if you're at this level, data informs your decisions on a day-to-day basis. At level 3, we move towards what we refer to as data practitioners that are applying analytical thinking and interpretation of more complex use cases to communicate data effectively. At this level, people have the ability not to just read and summarize information, but to also create data visualizations, design dashboards, and understand in depth what the data that they're looking at actually means. And then last but not least, at level 4, we have the data champions. This level is not meant for everyone, but it's for people that are very passionate about data and that would like to use this in order to enhance more data-driven decisions in their own organization. I think, or the question I would like to ask you yourself is, think about at which level you would consider yourself, and most importantly, whether it would be worthwhile to increase your skills and knowledge to move up through those 4 different levels. Now, to illustrate this a little bit with some backup data, and to showcase the importance of data literacy today, let's look at some data about the data-driven workplace. It's no big surprise that almost every organization in the world, no matter whether it's a small startup or a multinational enterprise, uses data to inform their decisions on a day-to-day basis. If for anything, you need financial data in order to govern your company and to pay the salaries every month. But to put that a bit more into perspective, note that around 2.5 quintillion aspects of data are created on the globe every single day. This is more data than we can humanly comprehend, and means data centers, football fields full of storage racks that are receiving data every single day. Now, an interesting fact about all of the data that we are collecting these days is that 73% of the data that is stored in all of those football fields of information goes unanalyzed, probably forever. So that means that in most data organizations, there's massive opportunities to achieve more value from data and to understand how their organization could benefit on a medium to long term from the data information that it actually stores. Another interesting fact is that organizations who use their data effectively, which we refer to as data-driven organizations, generally have a 5 times higher return on investment. And this is the primary business case of why data literacy matters. If you inform your decisions based on facts instead of just opinions, then in almost every single case, you will achieve better outcomes than peers or competitors who don't do that. And that is because data inherently contains patterns and trends that you can extract and that can inform your decisions to not just make better decisions, but generally to make those decisions faster than your competitor. And that can be in the identification of a product market fit. It can be in increasing speed to market, or for instance, to reduce your overall cost. So I thought that this would be interesting data to start our discussion with today, and it showcases you a bit of why this topic is so incredibly important. Now, to dive a little bit deeper, note that in order to become data literacy, it is important that you understand and know how data is used before we even produce those different visualizations. And I'm just going to give you a very simple introduction today. But for instance, you can look at the formatting of that data. Are we looking at structured, unstructured data sets, or for instance, data about specific data sets, so that we understand what the tools we have available for analyzing and interpreting that data. I think most of you will be able to will have worked with structured data. That's still the most common format. So think about tables, spreadsheets, information that is neatly stored in columns and rows. This is data that is relatively easy to analyze and therefore also leads to quick and easy visualizations. It becomes a little bit more difficult when we start looking at unstructured data formats. Here, think about PDFs, images, or maybe even audio or video files. We can also obviously analyze that. Think about traffic data, think about facial recognition. But it requires different analysis techniques, different visualization algorithms, and different tools and technology in order to analyze this. And last but not least, if you're looking at data about data, you also have a different interpretation layer. So I'm using this as an example to illustrate why data literacy is so important, because the structure of the data that you're actually looking at informs the possibilities and tools you need to select in order to translate that into actual and useful information. At the same time, you should also know more about the nature of the data that you're looking at. Are you looking at qualitative or quantitative data? Quantitative data is expressed in numbers, whereas qualitative data is described in descriptive categories, for instance, reviews or opinions. Are we looking at data that changes over time, like for instance, sensory data? Or is the data collected by a primary source, so by an individual or by sensor, or is the data coming from a secondary source, externally purchased, or coming from any kind of third parties? This will inform the trust that you can put into these data sources. So I'm using some of these examples to make you familiar that it matters that you know about the underlying structures of data, because later onwards, when we talk about data storytelling and visualizations, the inherent structure and inherent underlying consequences and of your data set itself will need to inform those decisions. Now, for today's session, I thought it would be very useful to provide some practical advice. And as soon as you know what the underlying data sets actually look like, then we can move towards the next step, is how do you then communicate that data efficiently? And in almost all cases, especially with larger data sets, people don't particularly like looking at rows and columns or individual pictures or looking at underlying databases. In order to communicate with data effectively, we generally create summaries. And because people are visually inclined, we generally do this through data visualizations. So a data visualization is nothing else than a graphical representation of data. And the whole purpose of doing this is to communicate information and insights in a way that is easily understood. The famous poet Oscar Wilde once said, "A picture is worth more than 1,000 words." And this is exactly what makes data visualization so effective. Another very important element of what makes data visualizations very effective is that they're universal. They are the same in every language, and interpretation is very common, although there are some distinct differences around different countries around the globe. So even if the underlying source data is in a different alphabet or numeric format, the summary visualizations can still be interpreted similarly by different people from different cultural backgrounds. So before I show you some simple examples, note that effective data visualization is really a critical aspect towards understanding how you can get a message across effectively. Data visualizations will help you with an improved understanding of your data. They will help you communicate insights more effectively. And most importantly, they will help you to improve your decision making. And therefore, it matters that you have a proper understanding of the data that you're actually looking at. Being able to ask significant, important questions around the data set that is actually on the screen will help you to understand what is actually being displayed, but also where you might want to ask some critical questions. Now, in order to illustrate this, I thought it would be fun for today is to show you some do's and don'ts, and to show you some overview of what would be proper data visualizations versus which ones weren't. And after this, I'll summarize this in some key takeaways. Let's look at some very simple examples. And in each of these examples, I've created two different visualizations. One is obviously the proper one, and the other one is not a good practice to do. And let's start with the use of color. Well, it will not be a big surprise on this first slide that the image on the left would be a proper business-focused and communicative way in which you can get your message across. The image on the right has way too many bright colors, is distracting, doesn't properly summarize it. Take into account that we're actually displaying very similar numeric information right here. So the underlying data sets are actually very similar. It's just that on the right-hand side, there is too much graphical elements and too much colors, which distracts from the main message. And you might have not immediately seen this, but the main message here is around looking at revenues. In this visualization, you are pulled away because you start focusing too much around color differentiation than actually looking at what the data is trying to display to you. Let's move to another example. Here we have, again, similar data sets which show sales revenue happening over time. Now take a moment to look at the two visualizations on the screen. Which one is considered a good practice and which one is considered not such a good practice? Well, I think it's actually quite easy to see. And here again, the visualization on the left would be considered the best practice. So even though these two visualizations display similar data, what makes the visualization on the left much better? Well, besides the obvious fact that there's a proper title and it is immediately clear of what you're looking at, also look at the way in which the axes have been structured. The axes on the right-hand side are with way too many zeros, and the decimals don't add anything in this visualization. And if you look at the y-axis, it's even completely unclear of what these numbers actually mean. So it's not just about the data itself, it's also how you display it and how you format your visualization in terms of the axis, but also in terms of the numbers that you see next to it. Now, one final example is choosing the right type of visualization. And once again, these two visualizations showcase the exact same data, but displayed with different types of visualizations. And once again, the proper way to do it here is by looking at the chart of the left, which showcases revenue over time as a line graph, and then using a pie chart to display revenue by channel. The visualization on the right does the exact opposite. So it shows revenue over time as a pie chart and revenue by channel as a line graph. And as you can immediately see, the information on the right is very difficult to interpret and basically provides no value at all. So I wanted to show you these three examples to kind of show you why it's so important to understand how to create proper visualizations. Now, I've used some very, very simple examples in this case, but note that in most companies, we are moving way beyond simple line and bar charts. For instance, looking at comparisons, using heat maps, using radar charts, or as you can see right here, some heat maps. And in order to benefit from all of these different visualizations, it's important that you have the ability to read charts correctly, understand which types of charts there are, but also when you create these, to have a basic checklist around how do I create a proper visualization. So in the previous examples, we've seen things like titles, the way that you structure your access, the legend of explanation, the use of color, and what the message is actually trying to display to you. And in order to illustrate that a little bit more in detail, I've used some very simple examples like pie charts and bar charts, which I think everyone is familiar with. But in order to effectively communicate with data, note that there are around 24 of different visualizations that you can choose from. And by being more data literate, it will help you significantly to have more options in your toolbox and different ways in which you can communicate about the message that you're trying to convey. So learning a little bit more about this, learning when you use bar charts versus histograms, when you would use line charts versus scatter plots, what a box plot is and what it's actually doing. These aspects can be very, very beneficial for you to communicate and get your message across more effectively. And this is exactly why it is so incredibly important to know this. There are many different rules of thumb, and the more you work with data, the more you've been practicing with this, the more easier it becomes to select the right ones without even thinking too much about this. So, for instance, if you would like to compare values around categories, you're generally using bar or column charts. Whereas you want to show things over time, then it's more custom or more proper to use line charts. I'm not going to read all of these out. But the main message that I wanted to give to you today is it matters what type of visualization you're choosing. And the best visualization that you can choose one is the one that your audience can understand at a glance, and the one that is portraying and summarizing the information that you want to get across. And that generally becomes a bit of an art and requires quite some experience in order to actually do that effectively. Now, why have I been focusing so much around data literacy and data visualizations? Well, the most important part is that these are two of the most fundamental building blocks to the concept which we call storytelling with data. The reason that we are interested in learning about our underlying data sets, the reason that we're interested in creating these kinds of visualizations is because we want to use data in most cases in order to convince someone or somebody to actually do something or don't do something. So data is used as a decision-making tool. It's used to argue why something is right or wrong, or why we should invest in a project or why not. And data visualizations and understanding your underlying data sources will help you significantly in telling your story with data. And again, it's been my experience that many people think way too lightly about this and have basic visualization skills, but forget about this last part. And that is, how do you think about the way that you're presenting your data to others in order to convince them to either do or don't do something? Now, why is this important? Because if you start thinking about data storytelling, it is all about conveying the right kind of message to the right kind of audience. So if you are, for instance, presenting a data set towards, let's say, school children, you might need to choose completely different visualization, different techniques than if you're presenting the same data set to a team of data scientists. So understanding who you communicate to and what type of visualizations you can therefore choose in order to get your message across is why we are interested in this in the first place. So that generally starts with capturing the information of your audience and understanding who you are presenting to at what particular time. And then also taking into account what the end goal of that visualization is. As many of you will know, especially if you work in larger organizations, most large organizations have dozens or sometimes even hundreds of different dashboards. And the reality is that half of those dashboards nobody ever looks at, ever. So they have once been created with the idea of conveying information, but nobody thought about what the target audience was behind that and whether they actually need that information in order to steer or to make decisions. So thinking about why we are creating a visualization in the first place, what is the story that we would like to tell with this data, is generally the first step in data storytelling. So here are some key best practices. The key elements that we would like to think about in selecting our audience and therefore selecting the right visualizations and understanding the underlying structure is about what the messages that you would like to get across. Think about using the insights. Don't focus too much on the data. Thinking about using a language that your audience understands, and lead with the question, what are we actually looking at? And more importantly, why should people care? Don't overcomplicate things and keep focus around one chart per message. You can perfectly well visualize it into a dashboard, but make sure that you don't have repetitive charts that provide different kinds of information. Make sure that it is clear to the audience of what you're trying to provide, but also that there is a level of literacy to the people that you're presenting to. On the right-hand side, we see some bad practices. So avoid dumping slides, avoid dumping endless reports with all kinds of different charts that people have difficulty understanding. Don't just move towards the end with your key findings. Really try to establish the key point that you would like to get across. And in as with many things in life here, less is more. So the more able you're able to summarize this into some key messages that you would like to get across, the better the visualization generally is. Now, within data literacy, we generally go through a practice of understanding how we can create effective visualizations to tell our story. And once you go up in that those 4 different levels toward data literacy, this becomes more of a habit. First time that you're doing this, it's going to be a lot more tough. But once you have some experience with this and you have practice with data storytelling, creation of visualizations, there are generally a number of best practices and rules that you can very, very easily follow in order to create these clear and effective visualizations that can help you to convey your message. So I know that there is a lot more that I can tell about data visualizations, different components on how you can get your message across. But I thought since today we have limited time together, it is also important to summarize a little bit of what we've been looking at here today. And I'd like to summarize some of the things that we've seen before is that understanding your workplace data sounds very simple. I've been in this field for almost 15 years. People generally assume that everyone knows about the way that charts work, the information that is being displayed. But it's been my experience that there is way too little attention in most organizations around how you communicate with data effectively. So although it sometimes sounds very simple, it is not. Most people are at that level 1, going towards level 2 in terms of data literacy. But as soon as people start to ask in-depth, more enhanced questions around visualizations, most people feel unequipped to answer those or ask questions around this critically. The other key takeaway that I would like you to do is that ultimately we are using data to convey a message. So ultimately it is a communication technique. And just as with effective communication, there is styling, there is a best practice on how you do this. In order to communicate with data effectively, you do need to have data literacy. You need to know what you're actually talking about and understand how those visualizations are built up so that you can ask important and informed questions. Data literacy, as we've seen throughout the last few slides, provides you a tool set. It provides you with an understanding of data, how data works, how you can create visualizations. So it is really a skill that you can master. You can get better at this. You can use this to communicate your message more effectively. and therefore to convince people to go into the direction that you're aiming to. And last but not least, you can be the best visualization expert or the best dashboard builder in the world. Ultimately, it is about effectiveness. It is about how do you tell your story, how do you convey it, and how do you use that to influence a specific decision. So I hope that with that, I have given you some more information around how you can use your workplace data effectively. Before we move towards the Q&A, I obviously would like to say that on behalf of the Data Science Institute, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The Data Science Institute is involved with education and learning programs and guiding people who have never touched a computer and need to get towards basic data literacy levels, all the way to advanced programs for data scientists and data architects. So I strongly encourage you to learn more. If you want to learn more about it, note that the Data Science Institute has two globally recognized credentials. If you want to learn more and have more knowledge around AI, there's the AI awareness course, and lots of the materials that we've been seeing in this specific session are actually coming out of the data literacy course, in which you learn how to dive deeper in data literacy and learn more about all of those structures that we've been talking about so far. Now, before we open up towards the Q&A, also note that there is a freebie that we're giving away for everyone who's joining the session today. So by scanning the QR code that you see on the screen, you can download the Enterprise Big Data Professional Guide for free and start learning more about enterprise data and some of the underlying structures. This guide is slightly more technical than the data literacy one, but it's free, so I strongly encourage you to take out your phones and download and sign up for this to get this ebook for free. It's around 250 pages, if I'm not mistaken, so it's quite an extensive resource. Now, let's open up for questions. I saw some questions coming in while I was talking. So if you have any questions and you would like to join the conversation, you can put your questions in the Q&A box right now. If you would like to upvote questions from others, you can also do that right here and let me moderate some of the key questions that have been asked throughout the session. First question is, what's your approach when the data doesn't tell a clear story? Sometimes patterns are inconclusive, or how do you communicate we don't know yet without losing credibility? Well, I think that that's a very interesting question. But I would say there's also a lot of strength in showing that data is inconclusive. I think we should actually do that more often, because in many cases, people try to prove something with data and trying to push for a message and try to find a backup in the data, even if it's actually not there. So if you've analyzed the data and you come up with a conclusion that something cannot be decided or cannot be visualized or is inconclusive, then I would say that that is even more of a strength than that it is losing credibility. So thank you so much for that question. Next one. How do you handle a story where data contradicts what the business wants to hear? Well, I would say that that happens in many organizations, and there's generally a disconnect between what people think and feel is a good idea versus what the data is actually telling them. However, many studies have shown that data-driven decisions and organizations who take those consistently will ultimately lead to better decision makings and therefore a competitive advantage to organizations who don't do this. So I actually think there's also, it's quite a powerful tool to showcase that data might contradict what a particular executive is saying. And by showcasing and visualization, at least you can have an informed discussion. So today I'm not going to go into the debate about data versus ranks and ultimate decision making, because we all know that sometimes reality conflicts from actual data sets. But at least I would like you to have the tools in place, the knowledge in place, so that you can actually start that informed discussion. Thank you so much for that question. And then last but not least, the next question is, how can I check at which level out of the 4 we are? And I think you're referring to the data literacy levels that we've seen before. Note that there are loads of assessments for this available, lots of different questionnaires that you can quickly fill in. I'm quite sure that on the data science website, Data Science Institute website, there's also all kinds of checklists that you can fill in. And this is also obviously something that is covered into the data literacy course. So I hope that that answers your question as well. But I think that if you browse through the Data Science Institute website, you'll be able to find that very, very quickly. With that, I would like to thank everyone for their time and attention and spending time with us again today. It's always a pleasure that so many people turn out for these sessions. So thanks so much for this. Sign up for the DASCIN newsletters because we are hosting these sessions very frequently. And I hope that at least in the last 35 minutes, you've learned something new today. Until we meet again.